Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Oscar Week. We're talking film editing as well as cinematography today. We're gonna go ahead and kick it off with film editing. If you want my thoughts on Best Director and Best Picture, those two episodes are out already. So after this one, go ahead and go give them a look. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go start at the top, and we're gonna go through all the nominees, and then I'm gonna go and give my thoughts for all the nominees. So yeah. So first up, we're looking at Ford versus Ferrari for film editing, then The Irishman, Jojo Rabbit, Joker, and Parasite. So, starting at the tippy top, Ford versus Ferrari. I think that Ford versus Ferrari is a very strong choice for editing just because I think the editing was so important for this particular story, just because, looking at the Formula One races and all of that, their editing needs to be very accessible and it needs to make that type of sport very accessible. And so I think Ford versus Ferrari is really, really high in the running for film editing. It's not my number one pick, but I could definitely see the award going to it because the way editing allows you to really be immersed into the world of the sport and also the storytelling was very, very, very well done. So then scooting down to The Irishman. Now, The Irishman, I think also is a high contender, just because, when you look at the storytelling in The Irishman, it's a film pushing 3 hours, right? And so the pacing and the editing needs to be very, very tight and on lock. And for me personally, the film didn't feel like 3.5 hours when I watched it because I think the editing does an excellent job of pacing out the movie. I got to see The Irishman in theaters and it felt like it went by in an hour because everything was so well put together and you don't get bored at any point in time. You don't lose focus. Everything is very interesting. And I really, really liked that. I also particularly really like how the editing in The Irishman really allows you to dive into the narrative and it really, really plays with the cinematic language. Because, Scorsese says it himself, film is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out of it, and a huge part of that comes through in the editing and how it's put together. And so looking at narrative traits like the look at family, the look at these men looking up to each other, the children looking upon the parents, all of that was cut together beautifully in the film editing and something that really enhanced the storytelling for me. So I think The Irishman is probably my personal number one pick for film editing if I were to give the award. But yeah. So moving down to Jojo Rabbit. I did like Jojo Rabbit. I thought it was okay. Looking at the storytelling in and of itself, the Hitler jokes do get old for me after a while. And I think the arcs could have been slightly, tightened up and stronger. And we could have had more of it feels like a kind of plateau and then all of a sudden like a super shoot to like a really intense place in the movie. And I think there could have been a more consistent arc throughout. And I think a lot of that comes from the film editing, but also I found that the film was very reminiscent of Wes Anderson movies in terms of how it was cut together. And it has this very quirky editing style to it, but the quirky editing style at certain points was kind of at odds with the narrative content for me. So I think Jojo Rabbit was a good film, but I wouldn't necessarily give it the film editing award just because of those particular things about it. So yeah. Tom Eagles, you did a great job. Don't worry about it. It's okay. I liked you. I like your movie. I'm sorry. So then, scooting on again to Joker. Now, I've talked about this a lot during Oscar week, but Joker, I think the editing was very well done. Don't get me wrong. I think it was good. It's just too much homage to Scorsese, and I wanted it to be its own thing. And so, there's a lot of shot for shot in terms of and it wasn't okay, so for example, when I'm saying the film was too homage to Scorsese, the film has a moment in the middle where it's shot for shot Taxi Driver in terms of the pacing, in terms of when the cuts happen, in terms of what's going on in the cuts, what the framing is, and all of that. It's exactly Taxi Driver shot for shot, right? In the terms of the visual language, the cinematography, and the editing. However, that's fine, but it's not something that's really, really driving home a new fresh interpretation of what that is. Now, looking at Scorsese, particularly his film Raging Bull, when you look at Raging Bull, it's cut exactly the same as the Psycho bath murder scene, right? But it's completely different content. It's in a different context, and using that psycho cut, it really plays with the audience's sense of, the people who have seen Psycho subconsciously tap into the tension of the psycho scenes, and it becomes effective for how Scorsese is using it. But it's also a really fresh take on completely homaging and doing a shot for shot of something else, or like a cut for cut of something else. And so when I say Joker isn't very like, when I say Joker homaged a little too much, that's kind of what I mean. And that's to kind of illustrate the difference between like what I see as homage a little too much, to where it's not really giving a fresh take at something, and, you know, looking at something that is giving a fresh take to the context of what it's homaging. So Joker, you know, I liked Joker. I thought it was a pretty good movie, but I just wouldn't necessarily give it the film editing award. My tops are, like I said, Irishman and Ford versus Ferrari. And also this third one rounds out my top 3 for film editing, and that is Parasite. Parasite was lovely in its visual language, and I thought it was such a breath of fresh air in terms of the storytelling. I really like how the film plays with frame rate, slow motion, and things like that, and also plays with the whole idea of narration, because narration, or like narration light, because it's like, it's very interesting how the scenes flow into each other, because you have two characters kind of talking and having an exchange, and that flows into what another character is doing, and it continues on as if it's narration. So, for example, there's a scene where they're coming up with a plan to get rid of a housewife. They're coming up with a plan to get rid of a maid who has worked with the family for a really long time, right? And so they're explaining the plan, and then as they're explaining the plan, it flows into the actual execution of the plan as they're continuing to voice over it. And so that worked really well for the narrative, and that's something that's very difficult to make work, because it could easily fall into kind of explaining and, you know, babying the audience. But I think Parasite did a really excellent job of leaving a lot for audience interpretations, but also playing into this whole idea of a narrator. And so I think that makes Parasite also a really, really strong contender for film editing, because I think it brought a lot to editing in terms of style and substance. So yeah, so let's go ahead and move along to cinematography, right? So I'm going to start at the tippy top, go through all the nominees, and then talk about all of them. So first up, The Irishman. Second up, Joker. Third, The Lighthouse, 1917, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So from the top, The Irishman. I thought The Irishman was very well shot. I thought it was very well done. I really, really like the use of the camera to kind of emphasize size in a lot of ways. So like a lot of the heist moments of it are very emphasized in terms of scale, because it's very easy in a very intimate storytelling setting, you know, where the story's really about the relationships between these men. But I think the way the camera really shows the scope of the situation in terms of, you know, looking at Jimmy Hoffa's relationships, looking at the mafia, looking at what that means in the historical context, as well as, you know, America's context at the time. The cinematography really helps drive home the stakes of everything that's going on. And that's something I really enjoyed about it. That makes it a strong contender for me. Joker, I talked Joker to death. You know, I think it was pretty good. I think, you know, cinematography honestly is a pretty high point for Joker. I liked how it made Gotham into, I will say, I didn't think the story necessarily needed to be Joker. I think it could have been like anybody. It could have been Joe Schmo, and it would have been fine. I think Joker just makes it more accessible to an audience, because it gives people a reason to go and see it. Oh, it's Batman, it's Joker, let's go watch it. But in terms of the cinematography of Joker, I thought it was really well done. It really makes Gotham look like the gritty place that you're meant to believe it is. And I think in a lot of ways, Joker is one of the best film representations of that, because you get a strong sense of that during the earlier Christopher Nolan films, but then it becomes very, you know, about the relationships and everything like that. But the way Joker shot the cityscape, I think that was an interesting pull from, you know, Martin Scorsese work, but that was done in a unique way. So I think the cinematography was a little bit more unique than some of the other parts of Joker that I would say. So yeah, moving on to the next one, The Lighthouse. Now, I actually completely spaced talking about Best Director snubs, so I'm going to kind of sneak it in here with The Lighthouse. I was so shocked The Lighthouse did not get a Best Directing nod, and I was also so shocked it did not get an editing nod as well, because I think it's excellent in terms of both. But that is one of the snubs. Another Best Director snub for me is Uncut Gems, Hustlers, and Greta Gerwig with Little Women. So those are 3 directing snubs. Sorry you didn't get that last episode, but you got them here. So then, Lighthouse, yes. freaking loved the cinematography in Lighthouse. I think Lighthouse is my number one pick for cinematography. I love the way the camera lingers on the subjects and how the use of long takes is done. I really love how each and every shot really feels like a painting. They all feel like there's a painting called, I think it's called Man at Sea, and it's a very, very important like existentialist painting. But all of the cinematography felt very like that, where all of them felt like little vignettes in time, and that was really, really interesting and fed into this whole storytelling and the relationship between Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. So yeah, the long takes were excellent. I also like the scale of everything as well. So like looking at Robert Pattinson and him being this character who feels like he's being oppressed by the world, having him be so small in frame and the whole world around him kind of swallows him in the landscape, I thought was an excellent decision in terms of cinematography. And it was excellent and beautifully done. And that is my number one pick for cinematography. Next is 1917. Similar to Lighthouse, I thought it very strongly played with the like whole idea of the long take, and that really helped you immerse into the storytelling. However, I will say, I just, I have a hard time with war films, so I think it's maybe even just a me personal aesthetic decision that I'm picking Lighthouse over 1917. But I did think that 1917 was very dynamic in its cinematography. I think it's a close second for me in terms of, who I would vote for. Then finally, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I really, Tarantino does such a good job at filming his dialogue and, getting people to film his dialogue. And so I think cinematographically speaking, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Irishman are probably tied for my number 3, because I just think the cinematography is so effective in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because it has that very traditional Tarantino style to it. And I think it's very well done. But yeah, so thank you all so much for watching and for listening. Sorry, I keep hiccuping at the end of these episodes. I'm so sorry, everyone. But thank you all for listening to my thoughts on best cinematography and best editing. Let me know what you think. You can connect with me at _RenaissanceWoman, or you can connect with me with the podcast at Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles. I'm totally free to talk to everyone about both. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? All that stuff. Next up, we are going to be talking performances, so you can look out for that episode. That's going to be really, really exciting. We're going to cover all of them: best supporting actor, best supporting actress, best actress. But yeah, look out for that. Thank you all. Bye. Mwah.